Yep. Oh, in the Independent, I guess it's a newspaper. I don't know what it is.
It's not a paper though anymore, is it? It's purely online.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay. All right, we might as well get started then.
Cool.
All right. Kia ora, comrades and friends. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you all very much for coming. My name is James Robbins. I'm the managing editor of The Big Q, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this lecture, Memes, Manifestos, Murder, Fascist Radicalisation Online, and How We Can Stop It. We would like to think here in Aotearoa that we are protected from the fractures of the wider world. We rather like the timidity and tedium of political life in this country, comforted by the perception that our politics are not existential, that we do not have to deal with life and death questions every single day. And we either laugh or look bewildered at places like the United States. We liked to say, it can't happen here. And then, of course, it did happen here. In March, as we all remember, an atrocity was carried out. A man, and I have to say this, allegedly, took the lives of 50 Muslims, many of them refugees from strife-torn countries. And thus the name, Christchurch, joined a long list of others all too familiar. Charleston, Utoya, Pittsburgh, Charlottesville. The accused shooter calls himself a fascist, unapologetically, even if the New Zealand press struggled to use that word too. It conjures up some familiar images: the jackboot, the swastika, the Sieg Heil, the concentration camp. But that alleged killer, and others like him, look rather different today. They are rooted in that era and that old ideology, yet they have adapted new symbols, new language, new methods of recruitment. They have exchanged the jackboot for the MAGA hat, the swastika for the Pepe, the Sieg Heil for subscribe to PewDiePie. The concentration camps, though, have mostly stayed the same. Often these modern fascists have no party, no vanguard front. Their radicalization is not through books and pamphlets and face-to-face interactions with other fascists. They are radicalized online, stewing in the darkest reaches of the internet, as the website 8chan describes itself. The internet has allowed them to extend their reach globally, to spread propaganda and disinformation much more easily. Building their movement online pushes otherwise harmless, or shall we say innocuous, local groups into much more dangerous territory. The Christchurch fascist, after all, is just as much a product of 8chan as he is a product of our own homegrown fascist organizations. Now, all of this poses new challenges to us. How do we identify accurately the markers of this kind of radicalization? What does that fascist echosphere look like? Is it possible to resist and curtail the spread of disinformation online without giving greater power to already very powerful social media companies? Now, luckily, we have Emmi Bevensee to lead us through these daunting questions. Emmi is a PhD student at the University of Arizona iSchool, studying machine learning and disinformation. Two of Emmi's recent papers include the alt-right and global information warfare for the IEEE, and also We Built an Algorithm to Track Bots in the European Elections that was recently published in the Independent newspaper. Emmi has an astounding grasp of both the scientific and the political, that is to say, the data and the ideology. Emmi is going to give a lecture for about 45 minutes, and then we'll be more than happy to take some questions, and we'll have a discussion afterwards. So please join me in giving Emmi a very, very warm welcome to the University of Auckland.
Let me get this lapel working. Is that, can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so there's a lot to cover, and there's only so many directions that we can go in 45 minutes, so I'll try to keep it as direct as possible. And anything super smart and correct that I say should reflect positively on the institution, but anything weird or wrong that I say is strictly my own opinion. So yeah, let's get into it. No, nothing? All right. So yeah, that's my cat. Yeah, I'm an activist. I've been in movement spaces for, I guess, a decade. I'm now, strangely to my taste, in a PhD program. I'm an academic now, I guess. I do data science stuff, write songs about my cat. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her. And so I want to talk a little bit about the way that I use words, first of all, because I think there's this common retort of like, oh, you just call anything that you don't like fascism. That word doesn't mean anything. And so I want to be really clear that I use words in very specific ways that are rooted both in movement and also in academic discourse. So a couple points, and before I go over it, I should say that while there are some key traits that I'm discussing here, the issue is more the concentration of these traits. Having, one or two doesn't necessarily make someone a fascism, but the more distilled and concentrated you get this soup together, the more intense the ideology becomes, and the more likely that people are going to be active in some form of terrorist violence. So we have things like ultranationalism, pretty clear. I think that most people understand what I mean by that. Syncretic is like an unnecessarily academic term that basically has to do with crossover and utilizing different parts of discrete ideologies. So an example would be the alleged attacker discussed sort of like typically leftist things like labor movements, environmentalism, things like this, alongside more obviously hardcore far-right things like ethno-nationalism and things of this nature. So a lot of times we see this kind of syncretic thing of like a leftist promise of like a social welfare net or something like this associated with the fascist rhetoric of this is how we're going to build it. So yeah, ethno-nationalism, traditionalism, authoritarianism, this idea of simultaneous victim and inherent supremacy, I think, is an interesting one. It's the notion of like, we were done wrong, but actually we're the best. And it's the weird white supremacist soup of like, yes, we're the supreme race, but also somehow white genocide is happening, and it's this simultaneously like kind of incoherent soup of we're the real victims and the rightful rulers that you see a lot of times justifying this kind of actions. And illiberalism, that's a complicated term, and that's more from the academic literature. I don't mean to say there's liberalism and fascism, and those are the only two political ideologies you can have. I just mean to say traditionally, fascist leaders have been opposed to sort of trade between nations and the kind of cosmopolitan, free discourse kind of ideology of classic liberals, regardless of what capitalism is today. And really important piece, it's on a spectrum. meaning there are pipelines that exist that can push people along the way, and the more concentrated these traits get, the more dangerous it becomes. But I'm not just saying that every conservative is a fascist or whatever, something like this. There are clearly degrees of threat that we have to deal with, even while we acknowledge different pipelines that can carry people through from just having some form of conservative ethics to being in a far-right movement. So the alt-right is just an internet-turned real-life neo-fascist white supremacist movement. Kind of found their footing in Gamergate, and they realized, oh, we can do more than troll. We can destroy people's lives. We can, you know, interact with real-life actions. And another thing that I've added is the way that I use the word edgy or edginess. I've noticed means a completely different thing in New Zealand, but I don't have a clear way of explaining what I'm talking about. So I'm going to still use the way that we use that word in the States. And so basically what I mean by edginess is like someone who, it's like a very malicious form of cheekiness. It's a way of, you know, casually pushing, you know, a little bit racist joke, a little bit of a homophobic comment, and then pushing the edge farther and farther to try to create a bigger space for that kind of behavior. And so a lot of times online, you know, people will say, oh, that was edgy, or like, don't cut yourself on all that edge, bro. So that's the way I use that term. I just want to clarify really quick. So, overview, the structure of the presentation, what's going on, how does it happen, what can we do? So, what's going on? We're in a global resurgence of fascism. It sucks. That doesn't mean they've won. It's non-linear. There's a lot going on at once. It's rising, it's falling, it's collapsing, it's concentrating. It's a chaotic dynamic that we're living in, and we're making choices and how to interact with and how to steer. But normally, in the waves of fascist rhetoric, it gathers power. People realize that you can't actually keep the trains running on time through an authoritarian dictatorship. They're overthrown in some regard, and it goes into disfavor for a while. So the question is, how bad does it get in that period, in that wave? And that's, I feel like, the choice that we're making right now. So a little bit about my context. Or not quite yet. So there's kind of this resurgence. Attacks are going up. Numbers of groups are going up. And to be clear, the ultimate goal of the farthest cells of this is nothing short of total takeover, genocide, and white ethno-states. And this is a couple of pictures. So Detroit is a city in the US, and during like Pride events, a whole neo-Nazi march happened that the police knew about and sanctioned. And clearly that's an attempt to intimidate. That's to say, hey, we're watching you and your degenerate lifestyles, and we don't approve of it. And so also in the US, like in a lot of other places, like especially in Europe, we have these huge and regular clashes in cities between really intense far-right gangs and anti-fascist groups. And these can be just like take the form of 300 and 300 street brawls, but they often spread out into the smaller streets. And it's quite a frightening thing, especially for people who are just like going to get their groceries and didn't know that their city was going to be taken over by neo-Nazis that weekend. Also, just a point of clarification, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Totally open to clarify something. I'm really excited to have conversation at the end. I don't assume to have all the answers to your context. And if your question is like a big derailment, I might bookmark it just for the end. But you're totally free to ask, and don't be shy. Especially if I say something that's like a niche concept and you're like, what is that? Somebody else is probably thinking the same thing, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the US. I'm not going to blabber on about the US because I know that We project our news too much as it is. So yeah, the US is not a fascist state, but it's worrying. And I live way down here in Tucson. I live on the US-Mexico border. And I would say it's a canary in the coal mine. And the reason I want to talk about where I live is because I think that it will give you a better sense of what being farther along the scale looks like and why that might be something you'd like to avoid. So yeah, I live by the border. We have internal checkpoints, which are illegal under international human rights law, but regardless of that, we have them. And this is, you know, this checkpoint is about an hour from the border inside of the country, and it's designed to make the path that migrants walk from a day's travel to over a week's travel. And these are the mountains that people cross the US desert through in order to avoid the checkpoints. So this is a mountain just outside of Tucson that people walk across. Yeah. Yeah.
I come in the US this time.
What's that?
I come in the US, right?
Yeah, I'm just talking about the US right now.
Okay, great, thanks.
But I'm going to move on from the US eventually. So Arizona, the state that I come from, is home to, I'm sure you all have heard about, child separation policies, the child detention camps, the concentration camps. All of that's in my backyard. There's a lot of movement resistance, and it's very confusing even to the legal scholars. Nobody knows exactly what's going on, but it's quite scary. And so that's what's happening. And in that context, all these pictures are also taken close to my house, or close to where I live. So this is, these guys are part of a brawling gang called the Proud Boys that just basically, at their worst, will jump people, minorities, like in alleys outside of events, but at their best are just like an edgy kind of political movement that is against masturbation for some reason. And, but they're brown shirts. And that's just what they are. So they exist for fighting. And here they are in public, wearing their colors in a normal kind of thing. So this is the same event. Here's a few flags from outside the event. We have "Come and Take It," meaning you can't have our guns. We have a remake of the Nazi war flag into the sort of meme style of Kekistan. And we have the American flag all together, just like the Founding Fathers dreamed it would be, kind of. And so this is a thing that I think people don't really understand outside of the US. We have a large movement of paramilitary organizations that exist outside and with the sanctioning of law enforcement. So this is an organization called Arizona Border Recon, and they're currently occupying a small town right on the border, and they do these they do these border recon missions where they ostensibly oh, we're all trapped. It says automatic. I'm gonna keep it moving. Just someone can solve that. So here, let me grab some water. Okay, so we have these militia organizations. They do these border missions where, according to the public, or what they say publicly, they're to do sort of citizens' arrests on migrants. But we have a lot of reason to believe that they're also engaging in assassinations. And they work in collaboration with Border Patrol. It's not uncommon to see Border Patrol hanging out with the militias at the internal checkpoints. They share intelligence. Border Patrol and the militias are very open about this. And also a lot of ex-Border Patrol join the militias for the greater freedom that it provides. And these militias are not always, but often very tightly tied to fascist movements and explicit white nationalist movements. So this guy spoke at this alt-right fascist gathering, just to give you a sense. So just to clarify, what we have is brawling gangs, paramilitary militias, and they're working with government forces to engage in paramilitary violence. Oh, wait, one back here.
Sorry, that's all right.
So how willing are they to actually use those weapons?
To use what?
The weapons that they're showing off?
Certainly willing. We can't prove exactly what they do because the desert is huge. But certainly willing. Although there are a lot of recorded cases of them actually murdering folks. In the town that they're occupying, there was a militia movement that raided someone's house. They dressed up like Border Patrol and then ended up shooting 2 members of the family.
I'm wondering what actually they think. I mean, like, scientifically, we are all the immigrants, you know, from Africa, scientifically, but what they are thinking.
They're hardcore.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Whiteness.
Yeah, they're hardcore nationalists, and I think that they have a might is right ideology that says that white nations were justified in their colonization, and it's important to protect those artificial nation states. And they operate from a range of conspiracies and sort of ideologies that we'll get into a little bit more later. So that's kind of freaky. I just wanted to mention it, though. So where I live, each of these red dots is an example of someone who has died while crossing the border. And some proportion of these we would assume is attributable to militia organizations, but mostly it's attributable to the environment. But dying in the desert through the environment is attributable to government policy that was specifically designed, it's called prevention through deterrence, to ensure that it was dangerous to cross. So now we have a situation where militias apply pressure in the field, and the government applies intensive legal pressures to destroy activist organizations that are working in resistance to the militia movements. For example, this person is facing decades in prison right now for human smuggling, for literally allowing someone who was dying in the desert to be in his house. So providing water and food or medical aid is now illegal in the borderlands. Additionally, doing water drops in the desert, as many humanitarian aid organizations do, has also been made illegal. So as policy changes, the government works with these militias to put pressure in the field on these organizations, and then combines that with legal repression. And so this, I would say, can happen anywhere, but once it starts, it's much harder to stop. And that's why I will make the case that you have to stop it wherever it appears. And you have to do what you have to do with proportionate force to stop fascist organizing.
I've seen the call to action on US websites and said that should call their representatives. Do you think the US Congress will listen to, say, New Zealanders and record them?
US Congress is pretty ineffectual.
Can't the whole of New Zealand just yell at them, hey guys, it's Dr. Trump, thank you very much.
The US Congress, aside from being deadlocked through weird US government structures, is also deeply divided politically. So the people who support border militarization are in a majority right now in US Congress anyways.
Well, I don't think that's kind of whole of New Zealand calling them.
Yeah.
New Zealand calling them stop it.
What's this?
Hi, I just want to point out for your earlier point with edginess, when they're asked to justify why they resort to it, they often say, oh, it's freedom of speech.
Yes.
Despite the fact that if you have freedom of speech, you're not
Yeah.
And they often say that in the hopes that, oh, we'll use it to get a free cut out of jail. And that's often hogties the law.
Yeah, it's tricky because we have the Constitution. I don't want to dive into U.S. politics too much. But free speech movement was a leftist movement in the U.S. historically that was used to protect people who were resisting forced conscription. So there's a weird, complex history to that. They certainly manipulate terms of discourse. Freedom of information is one thing, but yeah, as you mentioned, you have to experience the consequences of that. And also, freedom of speech only applies to the federal government. It doesn't apply to private businesses or institutions or whatever. So anyways, I'm going to try to push through a bunch of stuff. Whoops. So how does it happen? So we have these neo-Nazi gatherings that were organized over social media and where they planned specific acts of violence that happened in real life. The Christchurch terrorism was described as inspirational for the way that it utilized Facebook and other social media forums to encourage copycats, and indeed, there was a copycat killer in the US who cited the attack in New Zealand and followed the exact way that the New Zealand attacker did everything, including posting manifesto on 8chan and live streaming all this. So clearly they're using social media as a way to circumvent most people thinking that Nazis are bad, and there being a bit of a taboo against being a literal white nationalist. So they're trying to shift this thing called the Overton window, which is basically just the space of normally acceptable discourse. So it's like, what's on the news, what could be discussed in polite company, whatever. And edginess is about pushing that farther, pushing that window of acceptable discourse farther. And so there is a difference between these sort of proto-fascists like Donald Trump and actual fascists. But people that broaden the Overton window are often considered allies to these white supremacist movements. That's why we had figures like David Duke saying that Donald Trump was the candidate, you know, that the remnants of the Klan supported. And so we have these different pipelines, alt-light to alt-right to full-scale terrorism. That's just one pipeline. There's a lot of pipelines. And it's a way of pushing people along the process and changing. So now we have CNN the other day brought Richard Spencer, who's this American white nationalist who kind of helped found the alt-right, on mainstream news, ostensibly to say this is a bad example. But what happens when you put a white supremacist on mainstream news, a bunch of people see that and are like, oh, cool, I can do this. And so it has an effect of becoming advertisement. So the alt-right was extremely intentional with the way that they utilized this idea of the Overton window. They were discussing in forums on 4chan and 8chan and Reddit years and years before all of this. They were like, we're going to use meme warfare. We're going to try to push specific candidates. They said all of this explicitly, and then they did it. And it worked in a lot of ways. Now see if my, so this is the Overton window. Wait for this. This is going to be great. Yeah, that's the Overton window moving. Okay, so this is a little bit about some of the research that I do. So this organization called Unicorn Riot and a bunch of anti-fascist organizations infiltrated some white supremacist chats on Discord and then just cleaned the data, you know, to prevent any like doxing of innocent folks, and then just made a huge database called the Discord leaks and allowed anybody to do research on these white supremacist chat forums. And so I made a little algorithm that extracted all the links. So anytime someone posted a link, I would keep track of it, but just the base URL, which means I don't care about facebook.com/whatever, whatever. I just care about how many times did Facebook come. And then I use that to look at different aspects of the data. So the two main things I'm looking at are where are they propagandizing and where are they getting their information from. And so we see far and away the place that they're propagandizing is YouTube. With about half that for Twitter. So the top two are YouTube and Twitter. So they're using videos, and they're quite good at YouTube, actually. You may have been on YouTube and you're watching some music video and you get a recommendation for this weird alt-right thing. You're like, oh my God, I don't want to see this. That's because they're quite good at propagandizing over YouTube. So that's far and away the dominant part. I cleaned that out a little bit to look more at where they're getting their information. And then we see things like straight up neo-Nazi sites.
Would you say that those platforms are more lenient to alt-right, or would you rather say that they're just more popular and that's why they're higher in power?
A combination. It's really easy to make disposable Twitter accounts without verifying your identity, which has pros and cons. And it turns out it's a really hard machine learning or human problem to moderate every single Nazi account. Trying to do it in an automated way, you have a lot of basically false positives. And although, strangely, they've been really successful at moderating ISIS accounts, but somehow they've not found the political will or financing to successfully moderate white nationalist accounts. So it's a combination. There are some aspects of the platforms that are useful, things like going viral and the way that Twitter kind of collapses all communities into one while still creating echo chambers somehow. And YouTube recommendations, you can just fall into this pipeline and oh my God, then you've just been bombarded with a bunch of kind of manipulative rhetorical information.
I think in YouTube as well, all these comparationist like sort of videos about conspirations is huge.
Yeah.
And that is also outright propaganda. Sometimes it doesn't say we're Nazis.
Yeah.
It just starts with a conspiration that the
Yeah, yeah.
and that's how they lead you into the
They have this idea that they're like intellectual dissonance, they're on the intellectual dark web, that somehow the status quo is actually a super rebellious punk position to have.
that's how they catch you.
And it's just because they're trying to look cool and they're trying to do that rightful supremacy versus we're repressed kind of dance. So yeah, there's these pipelines like the alt-right will do things like interject a lot of reasonable positions. This would be called a Mott and Bailey in rhetorical, like in studies of discourse. A lot of reasonable strategies or things, and then like throw in this one really hardcore one, and then if you attack that, they're like, no, I was just talking about this. And some of the alt-right figures also will do things like, go on missions in the Mediterranean trying to sink Syrian migrant ships and live streaming it on YouTube. So to sort of say, oh, we're not in, they'll never say like, I'm a white nationalist, but they'll engage in these forms of propaganda so that they always have some plausible deniability, a little bit of distance from the thing, while still pushing closer to the thing.
That process, is that the reason why Wikipedia is the #2 link off source?
Yeah, isn't that funny?
It's got a veneer of legitimacy.
Yeah.
So that's where you can throw in the facts. And 4chan is #1.
Yeah. Yeah, so then let's look a little bit about information sources. Yeah, that's kind of a funny one, Wikipedia. Oh yes, we've done our research. So we have 4chan, which is like a free speech platform, sort of a complicated place, but certainly one of the places where the alt-right emerged. And we've got Gab, which is a free speech platform, which neo-Nazis used to organize. 8chan, which is like a more intense version of 4chan. Daily Stormer, which is a neo-Nazi site. And then we have the first like sort of mainstream media outlets, which are Breitbart, which is sort of this new conservative outlet that was run by Steve Bannon, connected with the Trump presidency, obviously. Daily Mail, no comment, and Russia Today, so Kremlin state-backed media. Make of that what you will. And then a bunch of other things that we'll discuss in a second.
Sorry.
Yes?
How did you separate out all those sites into the graph on the left and the graph on the right?
So actually, nothing super scientific. I got rid of all the mainstream social media and all the image hosting platforms, and then what was left was more of this one. So not that cool, but still tells a story. Yes, yes.
I've heard that Jordan Peterson, I don't think he has actually started yet, but he's at least planning to start a free speech discussion forum website. And again, I don't know if it's actually launched yet, but like, have you seen that website or at least discussion of that like pop up?
So that's a good example of how these sort of plausible deniability alt-right figures can use their semi-legitimacy to create a space for more hardcore movements to exist. I haven't heard about this one specifically.
I can't remember the name of it, but I think if you just Google like Jordan Peterson free speech discussion.
I wouldn't be shocked if he was just backing Gab.
Oh yeah, he also said that I don't think there'll be any moderation at all.
Yeah.
But you'll only have your posts deleted if the US courts demand it.
So the fun thing though is whenever you have centralized infrastructure, there's a lot that you can do to resist. Gab has had an extremely hard time. There's a lot of creative nerds out there doing a lot of undermining of Gab. Gab is not able to be on any app stores. They have had a really hard time finding servers. They are unable to fundraise because they've been pushed off of all their fundraising sources. So whatever they try to do, short of a fully, even they tried to move Gab to a peer-to-peer platform, and then all the other instances blocked theirs so that they weren't able to have the sort of bandwidth you need to make sure that a peer-to-peer system works. So it's still quite hard for them, and there's a lot we can do, even if they try to make these little corners. Oops. So they use a lot this idea of alternative news and, you know, pushing back against, you know, mainstream media and stuff like this. And so we see that, so each of these circles is sized by how many external links were to that site. And so we see the juggernauts, YouTube and Twitter. And then all these other ones, including all these little ones, are sites that maybe only a few people shared. And so what this shows is that there's a quite decentralized landscape of all these alternative news sites. And looking into them, a lot of them are like just these weird blogs, nationalsocialist.blogspot or whatever, WordPress. And then a lot of like, I don't know, they fetishize Europe. And so there'll be a lot of these like fake European news sites, clearly made by like American fascists, and stuff like that. So it's a quite decentralized alternative news landscape. They're trying to push back on mainstream media. So a little bit about conspiracies. So this guy, Tim Foley, is the guy who's the head of Arizona Border Recon. This is a public post. And Zero Hedge is a conspiracy website that's been linked to botnet activity and to intelligence agency information warfare. And it pushes this weird syncretic, like, trying to just, you know, view. And they use a lot of conspiracies and stuff. And so we see somebody who's the head of a militia organization spreading a conspiracy that's part of a literal information operation between warring governments. And then that conspiracy is fueling his decision to do, you know, border missions. And then, you know, people are sharing it, his friends are sharing it. And so there are a lot of these conspiracies like white genocide, and we could go really deeply into line by line, breaking down why you know, the Great Replacement theory and white genocide are bullshit. but suffice to say, it's pretty thin picking, the research that they use on these things, and they rely on two things, like, oh, we don't have sources because mainstream media can't handle how right we are, or academia is repressing us. Academia has not believed in race science since the era of slavery, and so they're just trying to keep us down. But then also, here's this source on nationalistsocialist.blogspot.com or whatever that I just wrote, in my mom's basement or whatever. So we can also use machine learning for things like bot detection, because now that we're getting into the realm of not just organizations, but larger forces manipulating movements of people, we can look at bot activity in a given hashtag. So here we see a bunch of bot activity in the Make America Great Again hashtag. And then here's an example of a bot account. You can never know for sure, but I'm reasonably certain that this is a bot account with 22,000 followers, a gun on the Constitution, followed by General Flynn, who's the former national security advisor to Trump. So we have a bot account that's promoting conspiracies that is run by who knows and is doing active influence operations on, well, now former government officials. And it's quite hard to push those accounts off, because if we called that account a bot and got Twitter to take it down, there would be a conservative backlash. They would say, oh, I'm a real person. They would have, and it would be quite inconvenient. But we can pretty reasonably assume that that account is part of a larger botnet. That's like a central account, and then there's a bunch of other bots that amplify that bot account by liking it or by sharing it or whatever. And they work together in order to push different agendas. So another example of this is in the EU elections for Parliament. We basically found that there was greater than 12% bot-like activity in the tweets that we studied coming from the far-right political grouping in the EU Parliament election. And they were primarily targeting Italy and Spain, the Italian and Spanish elections. And the Italian election is quite pertinent in this regard, because we have two parties that were explicitly descended from the fascist, from Mussolini's fascist party. We have Casa Pound and the Brothers of Italy, which are both explicitly fascist parties, not like I'm labeling them, like they were direct lineages. And then we have parties like Lega that are pushing the narrative farther, that maybe you wouldn't say are quite fascist parties, but they're farther than Trump, and they post these advertisements like with a white family sitting at a picnic table and a couple of like African men, and that say, which Italy do you want? So their politics are pretty clear in that regard. And they're benefiting from bots. We can't say for sure that they're running these bots. We don't know exactly. But they're benefiting from it. And they have an extremely adept grasp on utilizing social media. So this is a hashtag in the Italian elections. And we can see that Salvini was this. So I made it so that people's handles are made bigger by how central that account is to this flurry of tweets. Each of these dots is a tweet, so this is a huge map of tweets. And what happened is every other account is so small, and Salvini's account is large, and that just means that he was by far the most important account in pushing this hashtag. So it just shows that they are really cleverly using Twitter in a way that we found a lot of the leftist parties were just like tagging random words in tweets, and like it just seemed to not understand actually how the internet works. And so we can also map conspiracies in a similar way to see who the key influencers are, who they're targeting, how they do it. So this is a network map of a conspiracy in the US called QAnon, and clearly they're targeting Donald Trump and POTUS accounts, and this is one of the accounts pushing it. This is not a bot account, but we don't really know who or what this account is. So we can sort of use that to understand what's going on. So I'm going to try to push through this a little bit quick, although maybe it'll be controversial or whatever, but we'll see. So there are two main directions of anti-fascist activity. There's parliamentary anti-fascism, which is change laws, change leaders, create more space, you know, different sort of things like this. And then there's grassroots, extra-parliamentary tactics. This is popularly known broadly as Antifa, which is not any one thing, and focuses on three main areas: research, mutual aid, and defense. And so parliamentary anti-fascism has strengths. We can kind of prevent leaders who make things, you know, open the Overton window. We can prevent the coup of police and military of courts by fascist parties, like what happened with Golden Dawn in Greece. We can create protections for minorities in law. And in New Zealand, you can just call your politicians, you know, which is not actually common in other places.
Well, what do you mean by politicians? Can't, like I said, can't people in America call their politicians?
They will not respond because there's too many people. Yeah, so they will not respond to you.
Alright, so that's why they feel calling up to say to call Congress over working.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, what a shame.
So, but also this parliamentary has some drawbacks. It relies on state violence. So like prisons are not the best way to de-radicalize someone. Fascists tend to be quite good at courting nationalist politicians and police. In places like Greece and Portland, where we see a lot of active collaboration between fascist networks and police.
And I think it also reinforces the rhetoric, because it's like, oh, they don't want us to tell the people the truth. I mean, if they're waging a war against power and the elites, to do this basically confirms everything that they've been saying, is that the government doesn't want you guys to know the truth. And
yeah, it's tricky. I mean, we have to do it all at once, right? We have to pursue every path at once, because they're pursuing the extra parliamentary paths and the parliamentary paths all at the same time. And it's often super labor intensive. It can involve things like increased centralized state power, which nobody ever expects their enemies to get into power, but once they do, then they have that thing that you use to fight them. Laws can also create unintended precedents for later retractions of freedoms. This is, you know, if you ban books or speech acts, this is kind of the US libertarian argument. If you ban freedom of speech, then later that can be used against other groups, which is true, actually. If you ban this and then the other group gets in power, now they have a legal precedent, so they could say, oh, this, in the US right now, they're trying to make anti-fascist research classified as a terrorist organization. So there's some truth to these arguments. So then on the other side, you have this weird thing, Antifa, that's always in the news and it's very dramatic, which is just, it's not anything. It's not any one thing. Antifa is just anti-fascism. It's decentralized, it's autonomous, it's horizontal movements that just utilize a range of different tactics in resisting fascism. The tactics that they've settled on were developed over a long period of time, and mostly it's super normal people. Mostly it's nerds, actually. But generally it's quite normal people. And this is my least scientific graph. So basically the breakdown of what anti-fascist groups do is majority research. Vast majority is research. Then the other large majority is just mutual aid networks, social fabric kind of stuff. And then a very small part that's about like defending spaces. And so the research is like studying movements, but also doing sort of digging into different publicly available information. Things like Facebook groups, Discord chats. And this can, you know, involve things like getting a local business to ban a Nazi, or, you know, telling this person's employer, like, hey, did you know that this person said such and such on Facebook in a public post. And often employers aren't that psyched about that, and this has just devastated a ton of organizations. Identity Europa was a huge neo-Nazi organization in the US that was recently just completely toppled by this form of infiltration and just strictly posting their information. They tried to rebrand, they fell apart again. And so, yeah, it's a controversial kind of thing, but it requires a lot of due diligence, but it's proven a bunch of times to be pretty effective. And it's pretty low lift. Like a lot of people, you can just go on a Facebook event and be like, oh, this is who's going to this event or whatever. The other part of it is usually mutual aid networks. It's like fundraisers, making deep friendships and casseroles, teaching, digital or physical self-defense in marginalized communities, developing a resilient social fabric, sharing resources, and different forms of de-radicalization of people in your networks, which de-radicalization, when it works, is great, takes a lot of effort. So that's this other like essential part of what most anti-fascist movements do. The most controversial one is sort of this defense notion, which can take a lot of forms. I recognize also that protest movements in New Zealand are a bit different than protest movements in the US, but just for our context, it can be like a line of people standing between, the main protest body and a mob of extremely violent fascist organizations. It can be about deplatforming, different direct action types of things, but it can also be things like safe walks home. Your friend doesn't feel safe walking home alone, so you create a phone tree to make sure that, if one of you is trying to get home safe after work, you have somebody to work with. Different things, emergency response networks. Then there's a lot of digital techniques like mass reporting, terms of service call. You go in a platform and you say, hey, this organization, in your terms of service, you say that you're opposed to hate groups or terrorist organizations, and we found this account that's doing this thing. Can you take them off? If enough people do that, a lot of times they will. It's really effective for getting financial processors to drop different fascist organizations, like PayPal or whatever. It takes a lot of effort, but it's quite effective. Also, advertisers on websites, because a lot of that advertisement stuff is automated. So when you tell an advertiser, like, hey, you were on 8chan next to this swastika in this thread about such and such, they're like, oh my God, we'll get that on. We'll get on that, and then that's that platform's, how they make money on that platform is through advertisements. So there's a lot of different things like that that you can do. Oops. And so, without this kind of stuff, fascist gangs just rampage and brutalize victims, especially during events. This comes from my experience, but also far beyond my experience. Fascist organizations grow when they're only pushed back on through discourse or in the realm of like ideas.
Sorry, is that a picture of Spencer getting milkshake?
I think that's a picture of Richard Spencer possibly getting milkshaked. What my guess was he got pepper sprayed or tear gassed in some protest and then put water on his face to try to get out his eyes. And so, unfortunately, I wish that fascism could be beat in the realm of ideas, because I believe in the realm of ideas, but it doesn't sync up with history. And some different spaces where people pushed back and fascist organizations were crumpled were like the 70s and 80s punk scenes, Oswald Mosley, there's a lot of other examples like this. Fascist appeals rely on showing how powerful you are. So that means drawing a big crowd. That means going to Pride and marching and seed hailing at a Pride event. That way all the people who are like, I don't really like the gays, I'm not a Nazi, but I don't really like the gays, see that they have an ally in the National Socialist movement. And so when they're embarrassed, when they're outnumbered, or when there's a show of force and willingness to protect each other, it's very bad press. And our experience through movements has been their recruitment suffers. When they have a really huge victory, their recruitment goes up, and when they're consistently pushed back on, their recruitment goes down.
I think that's related to the spiral of silence effect, sort of like if they feel that the opinion climate is favorable, they're more likely to express those opinions, whereas they feel that if they're not, people tend to, feed into the silent majority narrative, but they tend to go silent. So in that sense, yes, to show that there is not a vast network support is of course gonna lead them back into hiding.
And I don't know that we can, eliminate fascism as a thing. I'm not sure that that's real. But I think that we can do is be like, that's flat earthism. You know what I mean? I think that's about the best that we can hope for, is like, that's not real. Not only is it unethical, it's just not practical, and it's like a really weird kind of dumb position for you to have. Why would you bring that up? And then people are like, oh yeah, maybe I should, I think that's the best that we can hope for, is that it's just like this dustbin of history kind of thing that a few people still believe, but don't have anywhere near the power to mobilize on. Yeah, and Richard Spencer, of course, said, Antifa's winning. It's not fun anymore, before canceling his tour. So yeah, these tactics have a lot of advantages. They're rooted in the social fabric. They develop community resilience. They're rapid. There's no center. There's no one person that you can take out to topple the whole movement. It's a lower cost for organizing. It's got a big reach. It's accessible. It builds a base for other forms of community mobilization. There's a lot of different entry points, from very low level, easy lift stuff to like high dedication movement work. Has a lot of drawbacks though as well. Has really bad optics in the press, because anti-fascist organizations tend not to be that excited about talking to media because they're worried about getting doxxed. Do people know what doxing is before I answer that? Anybody not know what doxing is? So doxing is the malicious release of someone's private information, usually in enemy territory. So an example would be posting your email, address, phone number, your family, their email, address, phone numbers, etc., in a forum of people who hate you and would be likely to act on that information. And then they'll do different things, aside from stalking that person's house or whatever, sending SWAT teams to their house, whatever. They'll use different things to, or hacking or stuff like that, using that private information.
So yeah, I definitely agree that unfortunately Antifa has a really bad reputation, like mainly in the press, and that is like very influential to just how the general public views Antifa. But it was quite illuminating before that graph that you showed about so it's only like 5% was it that, like, that's what people see Antifa as, is like, well, when they see that and they think like, oh, Antifa's violent and they're just like the fascists or whatever. But so as a matter of fact, those people, the people that do that, that's only like a 20th of the entirety of Antifa, and then the rest of them are doing, was it research and mutual aid? Yeah. But then it's the research and mutual aid, the 95% of the activity. Because
it's quiet, Antifa, it's invisible.
Yeah, it's not as visible, but yeah, it doesn't get as much coverage, I guess.
And aside from that, there are bad actors in any movement who are going to break with shared norms and do stupid things. And obviously the right-wing media is going to seize on opportunities like that. But also what we've seen a lot of is taking things out of context. Like, oh, this person literally hit this person on the spine with a stick, and then the other people jumped on that person, and then in the media they just show people jumping on that person. I'm talking about an actual thing that happened in Portland a month or so ago. And so then everybody's like, oh my God, they just attacked this conservative. And the movements are like, that person wasn't a conservative, first of all. This is their ties to hardcore white nationalist movements. But the people saying that are these discredited research organizations who only some parts of the media will even listen to. So it's a bit of a catch-22 in that regard. So just, and this is, so I'm getting to the end. So work from where you are is my message, and acknowledge that there's a wide range of tactics. Everybody has what they're comfortable or skilled at, or what they're in a position to do. Acknowledge that other people might want to do something different than you. Academics can distribute resources, do research, community leaders can host, families can look out for each other, activists can build momentum. There's a lot of different places that you can jump in from wherever you are. And I think that European settlers, especially, we need to look quite deeply into the ways that even if we're ostensibly opposed to white supremacist movements, the ways that we're recreating the structures that they're just honest about wanting because they benefit us as settlers. And the ways that we recreate those behaviors in our movement spaces and things like this. So I think that we need to be really, really brave and critical about those types of things. And also looking at how fascist creep can come even in leftist movements. A lot of people hop from leftist movements to fascist movements. This is not a secret. This is just a thing that has always happened. And why does that happen is conversations that are happening sort of in movement spaces. How do we prevent that? And so this is my nerdy appeal, which is that our memes are empathy, solidarity, intellectual curiosity, and mutual aid, and that we can do this. There's so much that we can do, and we are doing a lot, and we can keep doing it, and we have so many resources and so much power. And I think that that's really beautiful. A lot of what draws people to white nationalism is alienation. And so the fact that the not white nationalism movement is really nice is good. Yeah, we're super chill. We're having fun. We're not creating random prejudices and trying to create an ethno-state. It's great. Is a really reasonable position. So the question that I'm curious about from you all is what does Kiwi anti-fascism look like? And I would argue that it's unique to a place and culture. You build from your strengths. I think here, I'm an outsider, so I'm totally out of my lane in saying this, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's a huge amount of experience in fighting white supremacy in Maori communities, because they've been doing it for hundreds of years. And while it's not their responsibility to teach Pakeha about this, that there is this huge source of wisdom about what fighting the ideas behind white supremacy looks like in practice and theory. And so I have a lot of different questions that I'm closing with that are the things that I'm generally curious about. We can talk about it now, but also you can reach out to me separately. And so some of these are what are the unique qualities of how fascism mobilizes here? What topics do they seize upon to sort of push the discourse? What are the unique strengths that exist here? I think that the way that, as you mentioned, the way that New Zealand responded to fascist attack is way different than the way that the United States responds to regular fascist attacks. And that says something really unique about the political context here. What sort of anti-fascist infrastructure exists and how can it be supported? I think from my conversations with people here, maybe a quite important part of this discussion is what role does decolonization movements play in anti-fascism here? I would assume quite central, but what does that look like? And what role does the treaty play in anti-fascism here? My understanding is that these edgy kind of parties will use the treaty as an in to push sort of far-right politics while protecting the Te Reo version of the treaty is also a really important movement in resisting part of resisting fascist movements. So I'm really curious to hear more about all of you, but also you're welcome to ask me any questions. So thank you so much.
in New Zealand, and I've never been a victim to discrimination in the 6 years that I've been here. I've been treated so well, and I feel the Christchurch attack showed that. But at the same time, I was teaching at the AUT, and I had a lot of Pacific and Maori students, and the conversation that took place around that time was like, well, I feel that New Zealand fascism, I'm not going to call it fascism, I'm going to call it discrimination or racism, is very focused around Pacifica and Maori communities. And I feel that it's kind of sad that white Kiwis are more willing to accept a foreigner such as myself than they're willing to accept their own natives. And these were the conversations that I was having with my Maori students, that they were like, I feel a victim to racism in New Zealand, I feel discriminated. And I was like, I've never have. Why are we, why is the...
Where are you from?
I'm from Argentina.
Okay, I'm from Brazil.
You're from Brazil. Good experience. And people are fascinated by our countries. You say Argentina, you say Brazil, and people love it, and they're fascinated by our countries. And South American general, and I'm like, why? Why are you, why are natives in New Zealand more willing to accept us than they are willing to accept their own natives? Well, but we come from a country where it's exactly the same. We're more willing to accept European immigrants than we are willing to accept the fact that we have our own indigenous. So, as I said, it's a super controversial thing to say. It doesn't, in any way, it invalidates the amazing reaction that the New Zealanders have towards the Muslim community during and after the Christchurch attack. I feel that I had to have that conversation with my students at the time, because it was kind of sad that these communities, these native communities in New Zealand, were feeling sort of disadvantaged in the sense of like, why are we victims to racism, and in a context in which other communities are welcome. And so that was my 2 cents.
And it seems like there might be a lot of also inequalities with not all immigrant communities are treated the same. Like there was also the morning raids I've learned a little bit about, and and things like that. And obviously Middle Eastern communities have a different struggle maybe than South American communities here. And so maybe there's a lot of different layers of class, but also thank you for sharing your stories. So I got a stack. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
First, I think you're right, and I think like there's a reason that you still hear New Zealand more commonly than Aotearoa.
Yeah.
It's because New Zealand exists like on top of the suppression of the native people. If we then look at our past latent racism towards these people, we will have to rip the country in half in order to put it back again. Whereas here, there's, again, not to belittle the solidarity that goes on in this case, but there's a clearer path towards it, one which doesn't involve getting your own guts along. My actual question is, how do we deal with YouTube and the algorithmization of induction when these induction videos become part of the flow state of the media format itself? Unless you take care to turn off autoplay, you take care to know what's building your recommendations, how do we stop the snowball of sort of algorithmic feedback which says these videos are good and therefore should be pushed more, even when they start off in the position of being pushed?
Yeah. Well, so those algorithms are proprietary.
Right.
So we don't actually know exactly what they do, but we can guess. Right. And we can study what they recommend. But you can also push back on corporations to an extent. And Facebook is updating the way that they interact with moderation. And, there's only so far corporate activism can go. But Facebook can lose investors. Major, the stock can crash after Cambridge Analytica and public outrage, and you can pressure them to change the background of that. I'm not going to dive too much into the technicalities of why moderation is difficult, but if you want to email me, I'm happy to talk about the machine learning problems of it. But yeah, there's a technical problem and a political social problem, and they're interconnected, right?
I just, very quickly, sorry.
Yeah.
Like, so what happens then when the bottom line, the neoliberal holy grail of money becomes less important? If you're using ad block already, that means that you're sort of out of the capital sort of giving mode. To YouTube again as the example. So is there anything that we can do when sort of like we can't necessarily make an economic impact? Which seems to be the...
You can report things, and you can organize campaigns to report things, but it's a new field of activism, and we're exploring it all the time. And you can do research and expose people. There's an interesting article called I forget. I'll think of it in a second. But it's about how YouTube created a lot of alt-right movements. Yeah, alternative influence network. That's what it is. Yeah. So we had the 1, 2, 3, 4. Right.
Kia ora, Emmi. Thank you for your lecture.
Thank you.
I have somewhat a different experience as an immigrant to New Zealand because I'm a dark-skinned person from Sri Lanka. So for me, I see even this university as a colonial institution where there's a lot of white lecturers and that. You know, I'm lucky if they're not racist and treat me with dignity, but that's not a given. And there's a lot of rich white people's children in the left-wing movement that have a lot of biases. So yeah, I think that, but that's just my thing on that. But I really want to learn from the thing in America. The white racism is so bad. New Zealand is still bad, but maybe not as bad, not as batshit crazy as America. But in Italy, I've heard there is fascists having missiles. They can't get their machine guns to kill us. They're trying other ways. So I would like anti-fascist groups to be more successful. Obviously, the white-dominated sort of colonial media is, Trump's media is going to try and make Antifa look as bad as possible. Yeah. The problem is when we speak truth to white people, they always they attack us. There's a white backlash because, we are criticizing, So that is like the problem. We obviously have discrimination against Maori, literally the impoverishment of Maori, the wealth of white people are literally based on the impoverishment of Maori people. So, we talk about, fascists, and yet the real fascists are in our schools that treat Maori people differently. They're in our workplaces that, treat people of colour and Maori people lesser than white people. So I don't, to be honest, I don't have a very favourable idea of white people in New Zealand or elsewhere. So.
And that seems fair, all things considered. Yeah. Wait.
Sorry. Okay.
So you're going to be 5th on stack.
Okay, just like that.
And 6. Oh God. Thank you. I'm not going to say anything because your words should just stand, and they should just stand in the space. So let's.
I just want to touch on what you said first. That I really appreciate that, and I think the biggest thing that came out of, on a public education point of view from the Christchurch shooting, that hopefully people listened to was all of the migrant experiences of racism that happened in New Zealand and are totally normalized. And I just want to point out that this is in this context, being from Latin America, New Zealanders would tend to lump you into being a European. So that's a really different immigrant experience. My question was, we're coming up to election, and there's a very good chance that the leadership of the right-wing party is going to change to someone who is very alt-right friendly. Her name's Judith Collins. She's our closest possible Trump pipeline type figure, and she uses Twitter, retweets conspiracy theory stuff, and then defends it instead of deleting it. In terms of anticipating that, and also the fact that I think there's going to, in the upcoming election, be a big backlash to like identity politics, that kind of stuff. And I feel like she, particularly if she gets put forward, is going to use that kind of a strategy. What would you recommend from a data science perspective in terms of preparing for like bot mobilization and that kind of stuff on Twitter especially?
So running bot networks is resource intensive. So I think that the main times that bot stuff happens is through intelligence agencies and corporations. I think that it'll get more and more accessible to parties. So I don't really understand enough about the geopolitics of New Zealand to know like who's going to be trying to interfere in your elections. But I guess the important thing would be to combine sort of classic grassroots activism with studying the networks that are propagating these messages. And it might not even be that they're bots, but you might see a lot of strange troll accounts that are new and pop up. And you can kind of put those accounts on blast. You can be like, oh, we found all these accounts that have never posted and then just started posting really, really intensely about the election. And you can do sort of journalism about this or report them or things like that. But I feel like there's a lot for you all to explore that I can't like give really clear-cut answers to. So I want to continue with the stack. I forget who was 4. Oh yeah, 4.
So I tend to see a lot of apathy, I guess, towards actual fascist activity in New Zealand, even in the wake of the Christchurch massacre. Like, I can give you a couple of quite specific examples. So at the New World Metro on Queen Street, which is like a 10-minute walk that way. I think, I'm not sure which way is there. I don't go to this uni, so I don't even know which way is north from here. Yeah, but it's like in the middle of Queen Street, New World supermarket. And then I went there and I saw a swastika and an SS. It was definitely not like someone's like, oh, like maybe it's like a Hindu peace symbol. It's like, fuck off. There's an SS right next to it, and like the zigzag little lightning bolts. It's definitely a fascist symbol. And so I went in and spoke to the manager there and showed them, and he's like, oh yeah, okay, we'll get on to removing that. And I was like, cool, see you later. And then like the next week or a couple of weeks went by, and I went past and I saw the same thing there again. And so I went in and I said, hey, like I was here the other week, I saw this, I told your manager, and they said they'd remove it, and they didn't. And they said, oh, it's there again? And so I don't know if...
Yeah, I mean...
But I actually, and then I went there a third time, like a couple of weeks after that, and I saw it there again, and I thought, hang on, did they actually remove it? And because I'd taken a photo of it both times, and I compared it at like where it was on the tiles or whatever, and it was the exact same. It was never removed. And the first or second time, I like put it up online and was like, what the fuck is this? And some people were like, oh, it's just some edgy kids or whatever. And then, so it's probably still there. Like anyone here can go there, and it'll probably still be there. And then a little bit later, so this is a different story. And then there was someone, I can't remember where, but out west that they've been harassed, and they've had they've had death threats sent to them, and they've had like dead animals put in their litter boxes, and death threats put in their mailbox, and their house and vehicles have been vandalized. And that, like, I shared that online, and people were a bit like, oh shit, like this is some serious shit. And you know, they're a bit more like condemning of that, but like there were still some people like, oh, it's just some edgy kids or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, this guy's actually having death threats sent to him. He doesn't know who it is. Can't even guess. The police aren't really being that helpful. And there's still, even still, there's that, and that is, it's still in the wake of the Christchurch massacre. We're still talking about the Christchurch massacre. We're still feeling the effects of the Christchurch massacre, and people are still apathetic about it to that degree.
So a couple of things. One, my belief, you're welcome to disagree, is that if you rely on authorities to protect you and respond to this type of activity, you will be let down a lot. If you rely on bureaucracy to handle these types of things, you will be let down a lot. Certainly no one should commit crimes, but were a swastika to be graffitied over or leafleted over with wheat paste, probably no one would be that sad. Especially if management just seems to not care.
Yeah.
And
but
police...
I thought at first, sorry to interrupt, I thought at first that I would actually tell the managers, because I would have hoped that the managers wouldn't have been apathetic enough. So like maybe you all can be made an example of as well. And so people should push the management, push the police, etc., to be accountable, and I recognize that police here are very different than police in my country. But at the same time, I understand there's still disproportionate incarceration of Maori in a similar kind of racialized way as in the US. So relying on the police to protect you against white supremacy when they exist to maintain landed elite property titles that have been handed down through generations of colonization seems like there's some perverse incentives there, and it might be a little slow going, but more power to the people who go for it. Who was next?
We've got about 10 minutes left, Emmi.
Oh yeah. So wait, I already got you a few times. Who was the next one?
I was 6.
I wasn't keeping track of the numbers. I think you're next. And then up there.
Okay, so the main thing that I wanted to say is people were talking about what can actually be done. And if those of us, or those who are familiar with Internet New Zealand, they're the organization that controls our domain. They are also an incorporated society with a policy team who have created something that they call the Christchurch Hall, where they're working at the international level to try and get other internet governance organizations engaged in. They're using the framework of counterterrorism, but what it really is anti-fascism work. That organization benefits when people like us join. It's $20 a year, so it's super cheap. It is much easier for them to be loudly anti-fascist when their membership is loudly anti-fascist and not loudly commercial. So if you're looking for something to do with $20, joining Internet New Zealand would be awesome. Their council's really great. Their staff is really great.
What's it called, sorry?
Internet New Zealand, and they're responsible for the .nz domain. Right. And their policy team spends an enormous amount of time thinking about and working on this, and funding groups in the community who do this kind of organizing. So join them, please, so that the internet community is more than just the people who make money from it.
So
I will happily address any questions for Internet New Zealand.
So I've got back there and then up here.
Internet New Zealand.
New Zealand. I'm noticing what I think is an extreme tendency to uncharitably interpret people who are on your political right, and an extreme willingness to charitably interpret people who you politically agree with. The example is, I would go to the latter is Antifa, which are well documented as engaging in unprovoked violence, such that they've been designated by Homeland Security as a domestic terrorist group.
False, but continue. That is not passed. That will never pass in Congress. But continue, please.
And
that's not the case in this.
Wait. Let him talk. Let him talk. I got it.
I'm just addressing the talk.
Yeah. Let him finish.
There's an anti-fascist in this country, and it's not a violent organisation, and the Antifa in the United States is also not a violent
I'm just
organisation.
addressing what was in the talk. So, do you think that you're unwilling to charitably interpret your political opponents?
So I'm super into free speech and discourse, but more than even free speech, I'm into freedom of information. And what that means is we have to look at this in a complex way. So there's different levels at which free speech exists. And one person has the freedom to make a space very uncomfortable for minorities. And that is a type of freedom that they have to express racist, homophobic, transphobic comments. However, in doing so, there are other freedoms at play. All the people who then feel unsafe to speak through a chilling effect, especially if these different organizations start to gain power and have influence in things like admissions or different structural agendas, these freedoms start to interact. So you're following me? There's different levels at which freedom exists, right? And for the most dramatic example of that would be, you have the freedom to organize a neo-Nazi coup and overthrow the government. That is a type of freedom, but that will vastly destroy other freedoms. Fascism is not a free speech movement. Fascism is a hardcore censorship police state movement. It's a big government, authoritarian, totalitarian movement. That being said, I'm much, much closer and friendlier to right movements than I would say most people are. I have heaps of friends who identify with the libertarian right or just mainstream sort of conservative ethics because I'm generally curious. I'm more curious than I am invested in my own team. That being said, collapsing the political categories of sort of conservative ethics and hardcore neo-Nazi terrorist movements is a political strategy that will destroy freedom. And so to imply that it's a sort of soft free speech movement is a little bit of, well, it's just blatantly dishonest. Okay, so next question. I answered that question, and I let you finish. So,
I was just going to say before you were talking about how we should see fascists as, or we could see them as crazy or as coming to crazy kind of, that conclusion doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about how it seems to be more of a useful tool politically to see that position as something that does make sense out of the society that capitalism creates, in which we find our thought and how we kind of navigate what we think of ourselves and what we think oppression actually is. And so, yeah, what role do you see Antifa playing in needing to recognize and build beyond alternatives beyond capitalism, and how far do you think that we need to recognize the inevitable, because I personally don't think it's inevitable that the best we can hope for is fascism kind of pushed to a corner and silence as much as we can by confronting it enough, and it'll be a dustbin of ideas. I actually think a lot of their ideas make a lot of sense. Like there's a lot of like appealing to active things of like alienation and feeling misrecognized and like a lack of sense of community or anything, which a lot of their values are underpinned by in a lot of the things they think. And it seems like destroying a society which can create that as something that makes sense and something that would give you, which makes that opinion actually have some kind of standing and wide appeal because of the already existing alienation that people do have. It seems like this kind of right-wing fascism is incompatible to be beaten under capitalism. What do you think that role is in transforming the economic side of society within it?
Yeah, thank you. So certainly the notion that like fascist movements are an aberration or sort of came out of nowhere is such a fantasy, right? They're deeply embedded in the history of capitalism, and deep kind of drives in humans that, I think one of the most central sort of ideological points of fascist narrative is the notion that we exist in a non-zero-sum competition for survival. And so the only way to win is to dominate, is to form a small and powerful group